Hi there. My name is Brad Smalley, and I'm the narrator for Wild West Podcast. We put together a production unlike anything that we have ever done up to this point. We're awfully proud of it, and I think you'll enjoy it just as much as we do. It's entitled Civil War Day. What we did is we got together with a group of Civil War reenactors and filmed a documentary detailing the state of Kansas's role in the precursor to the American Civil War. What a lot of folks don't know is the role that the state of Kansas had in its transition from territory into state and the evolution of the conflict known as the American Civil War. You'll see battles, you'll see marches, you'll see the conflict between the North and the South. You'll see the differences in philosophy, differences in economics, differences in cultural understanding between the North and the South that all had their origins in the foundations of the state of Kansas. The story of Kansas is really the story of the Civil War in microcosm. Everything that happened in the country just happened in the state of Kansas on a smaller scale. As you see the evolution of what went on here, you'll understand in a deeper level the entire story of the American Civil War. We'd like to thank these reenactors for their dedication and their love of history, that they have gone out of their way. They spend their paychecks, their time, all of their love and devotion in bringing this history of the United States to the modern era so that you and I can share these stories. We hope you enjoy this presentation. Welcome to Civil War Day.
The cataclysm of the Civil War uprooted institutions that were centuries old, changed the politics of a people, and wrought so profoundly upon the entire national character that the influence cannot be measured short of 2 or 3 generations. Mark Twain.
My name is Gregory Hunt. I'm the farm manager out here at Old Cowtown Museum, and today was superb. Today was the Civil War celebration that we have each year, and we've been doing this for at least 17 years. This year was a battalion level event, so we were able to get 120 per side, maybe 240 rifles out here. They'll start showing up Thursday or Friday. They'll camp out on grounds, or in case of inclement weather, we have a variety of buildings out here that we can house them in. But for the most part, they really enjoy camping out in a manner that would have been the case back in the day. They eat no food that they didn't bring in themselves, cook everything over a campfire. They're eating hardtack out there. So when the visitors come out for the big show on Saturday, we have 2 battles, and it's interspersed with drills, pay call. I had a visit from Lincoln this time around. Though they're able to see a Civil War battle play out in real time. It's very similar to what everybody's familiar with in the movies, but there is a lot of marching, a lot of walking. They have to cover a lot of ground on foot. And so they are slower battles. They work in rank and file rather than a lot of running around and bushwhacking activity. And so to see that play out on the battleground in real time it's interesting. It took me by surprise the first time I saw it. And you're able to smell the smoke, you can hear the cannon, you can watch these guys taking shots and reloading. It's really interesting to see it play out in real time. So yeah, once that battle starts, you've got cannons that are loud enough to knock you down. You can feel the shock wave off the cannon. and followed by a cloud of white smoke rolls across the crowd. It's really something that you can't capture any other way than being there. The long rifles they use, 20 guys at a time will load and then fire them, recapping them with the primers. It is very interesting to me to watch, 20 guys move down the field, moving and firing, right in the middle of the cannon fire.
The Civil War in the United States began in 1861 after decades of simmering tensions between northern and southern states over slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. Assumption to explain the cause of the American Civil War is that the North was no longer willing to tolerate slavery as being part of the fabric of U.S. society. Slavery, while a major issue, was not the only issue that pushed the country into the Great American Tragedy. The key issue was whether slavery would be allowed in the newly created states that were joining the Union.
As the Southerners fought for their rights as individual states, you also had the Union Army, whose main job was to suppress and contain the rebellious states in the South. And initially, when Lincoln got into office and stuff, his main goal was not to free the slaves, but bring the Southern states back into the Union. And he stated in his second inaugural address that if he had the chance to bring the Southern states back into the Union, he would, if that meant keeping slavery, he would do it. If they could resolve it and not have slaves, he would do it. But either way, if it meant keeping slavery would bring them back into the Union, he would have done that.
Kansas was officially opened to settlement in 1854, and there was a rush to settle in the state between those who supported slavery and those who opposed it. The state of Kansas became a place of violence between the two groups. Kansas got the nickname Bleeding Kansas in recognition of what was going on there. However, on January 29, 1861, Kansas was admitted to the Union as a slave-free state. Many in the traditional slave states saw this as a first step toward abolishing slavery throughout the Union, and thus the destruction of the Southern way of life. By April 1861, slavery had become inextricably entwined with states' rights, the power of the federal government over the states, and the South's way of life, all of which made a major contribution to the causes of the American Civil War. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 caused 7 southern states to secede and form the Confederate States of America. 4 more states soon joined them. Even as Lincoln took office in March 1861, Confederate forces threatened the federal-held Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. On April 12th, Confederate artillery fired the first shots of the Civil War. fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. On the surface, the Civil War may have seemed a lopsided conflict, with the 23 states of the Union enjoying an enormous advantage in population, manufacturing, arms production, and railroad construction. The Confederates had a strong military tradition, along with some of the best soldiers and commanders in the nation. They also had a cause they believed in, preserving their long-held traditions and institutions, chief among these being slavery. The first real action for Kansas troops came at the Battle of Wilson's Creek near Springfield, Missouri, on August 10, 1861. Both the 1st and 2nd Kansas Volunteer Infantry regiments were engaged, but the 1st saw the most action and suffered heavy losses. Several times during the Civil War, combatants had to declare a ceasefire and engage in parley, to speak. The battleground had become so littered with the dead and wounded they could no longer fight. It was necessary to clear the field until hostilities could resume at a later time. The screaming, moaning, and groaning of the fallen soldier made engaging in battle a hardship for those living to fight on. These were unofficial soldiers' truces, where warring opponents sat down their weapons and became the American brothers they were before the war. We have shared the incommunicable experience of war. We have felt, we still feel the passion of life to its top. In our youth, our hearts were touched with fire. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. At least 620,000 soldiers lost their lives in the war. 2% of the American population in 1861. If the same percentage of Americans were to be killed in a war fought today, the number of American war dead would exceed 6 million. The Civil War had a greater impact on American society than any other event in the country's history. It was also the most traumatic experience endured by any generation of Americans. The institutions and ideology of a plantation society and a slave system that had dominated half the country before 1861 went down with a great crash in 1865 and were replaced by the institutions and ideology of free labor entrepreneurial capitalism. For better or worse, the flames of the Civil War forged the framework of modern America.